So it's finally here, after months of my friends practically interrogating me over it, screaming,
"Where's the Oppenheimer video? You said you'd give it to us by now."
The truth is, this video took a long time for two main reasons. Number one, I knew this film needed to be done justice in any video that I made about it. But secondly, and more notably, as much as I loved this movie, I truly didn't know what it was that I wanted to say about it. Because in truth, for a while, I wasn't sure why it was that I loved this movie. Because in my humble opinion, this movie shouldn't work, but it does. And when I realized that, I finally realized what it was that I wanted to say about it. So prepare your ears, because my take on Oppenheimer begins now. So, going back to that statement of why I don't think this movie should work, I'm going to elaborate on why I feel that that's the case. We live in an age now where entertainment is largely based around dramatic plot twists, the subversion of audience expectations, which, as we know, all too often ends horribly, and films based around large action set pieces, and of course, the rise of a Hollywood that's mainly dominated by franchises over original films. Slower, more cerebral films, at least in terms of popular entertainment in the big budget blockbusters, tend not to exist anymore. And moreover, Christopher Nolan himself, in the majority of his work, relies heavily on action set pieces of grand scales. These are all major parts of his films, whether it be the chases of the Dark Knight trilogy, the mind-bending, reality-slipping bouts of Inception, or Tenet's time-bending brawls. And yes, whilst every Nolan film always has an air of the cerebral to it, Oppenheimer takes this to the next level. Oppenheimer ultimately has one action set piece, if it can even be called action, and that's the detonation of the test bomb. In fact, I would go as far as to say, even though this is at the end of the second act, it's actually what the whole movie centers around, which is strange in a screenplay, because normally stories tend to escalate so that the central element, be it a battle or a plot resolution, occurs in the final act, and then the movie is complete. But this is where the genius of the movie's screenplay comes in, both within the context of this movie and in our own real world context. The development of the nuclear bomb is not the end of the story, nor was it the start. It was a pivotal event in human history, of which both the lead up to and the aftermath of its creation are of equal importance. For this film to explore its theme of what a nuclear world means, the detonation of the test bomb had to be in the middle act. If Oppenheimer ended with the explosion, and then the bombs being shipped off to Japan, and then the credits rolled, what you'd have is a movie that charts the development of the first nuclear weapons, yes, but a film that fails to explore the worldly repercussions of this. But the screenplay of Oppenheimer goes a step further than this. The story of Oppenheimer, if put into chronological order, wouldn't work nearly as well in terms of engaging an audience, especially with, as mentioned, a super deep concept. By breaking up this order, it keeps the film fresh and interesting, because rather than have one mystery or plot beat running at once, Oppenheimer is able to spin multiple plates at once, and in the process creating a story that's super engaging to watch, especially with the variety of colour gradings as well, breaking up the film visually, with the flick between the black and white sequences and the colour ones. This also makes sense from the perspective of how humans think. We rarely look at our lives in chronological order. Memorable events come to the forefront of our minds when something triggers them that either relates back to or reminds us of a previous moment. This film isn't called Atom Bomb. The film is called Oppenheimer, because even though the themes and consequences of nuclear war are what underpin this movie, they are told to us through character, because ultimately that's how we connect to stories. Now, I've heard people discuss how none of the characters in this movie come across as particularly likable, and people suggest that they're difficult to root for. Now, this is a valid point. As mentioned in my Batman Begins video, the link to which should be appearing on your screen now and will also be in the description below, Nolan, as a writer-director, relies heavily on themes and motifs more than he does character work. In fact, one element I mentioned in that video is that Batman Begins is one of the few movies where character comes closer to being the central element of that film via the humanization of Bruce Wayne. But back to Oppenheimer. Nolan needs to show his audience how Oppenheimer thinks and what Oppenheimer is thinking. And given he comes across as quite a cold and distant figure, both in terms of on screen and from real life interviews, conveying Oppenheimer's inner thoughts is a real challenge. And Nolan solves this problem via two decisions. Firstly, he cast Cillian Murphy in the role, an exceptional actor who is really able to transform into the roles he's playing. Watch him in Batman Begins, Inception, Peaky Blinders, and this movie, and you can see his superb range in his acting skills. Killian is also a master of conveying a character's internal thoughts without much external action. He can convey a feeling through merely a gaze or subtle movement, and that to me is what I always look for in an actor when I'm looking for greatness, the ability to perform with subtlety and nuance, because to my understanding, it requires a deeper level of skill compared to just being able to shout really loudly or cry dramatically. Of course, none of these things are easy to do well, but subtle nuances seem to be what divides the good from the great when it comes to that craft, at least in my own opinion. Nolan's second solution is through editing. The film is littered with shots of nuclear fusion, especially in the run up to the test detonation at the end of Act 2. And what this does is convey to us Oppenheimer's genius as he slowly develops his ideas. This links back into my point about this film's lack of chronology, because Oppenheimer is referring to his teachings in his life as a student to help him come up with his ideas in the present. The second half of the film no longer shows nuclear fusion in these quick edited shots. Instead, they focus on what Oppenheimer envisions as a post nuclear weapon world. And this is how the film tracks the guilt and feelings of imminent dread Oppenheimer feels, whether it be that excellent sequence during his trial scene where the wall of the room explodes, mirroring Oppenheimer's mental state at that point, or my personal favourite, being the scene in which he delivers a speech following the successful test detonation. It's a masterful scene as the people slowly fade out as Oppenheimer's focus turns inwards as a consequence of his ever deepening guilt. First the sound fades out, and then the people do, until we see him step through what he envisions a corpse of nuclear weapons would look like. It acts as an excellent manifestation of his growing guilt, showcasing his shutdown from the world around him. This film is very powerfully edited, as shown in scenes like that, and this continues throughout the film. Even more simple elements, like the discussion of Oppenheimer's relationship with Jean Tatlock during his investigation trial, is shown to us rather than just told. I'm afraid you're going to have to watch that film for yourself for that, because I'm not going to be able to show it here on YouTube for obvious reasons. Intriguingly, this film's non-linear structure is actually something that Nolan is very familiar with. His films Batman Begins, Memento, Dunkirk, and Tenet all use some form of non-linear storytelling. Nolan discussed this many years ago with relation to Memento, and I'll play the clip of his explanation now.
Okay, what do you have? You have the beginning of the film here. What's the best way to draw it? The best way to draw it is as a hairpin, like that. That's basically the end of the movie. This stuff is the black and white stuff. This is color. And this is running backwards as a series of jumps. And what we do is we cut between the two the whole way through. So we alternate scene here, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, scene there, and then meet towards the end of the film. But then within this, you have flashbacks to a different timeline, which is actually even earlier, somewhere around there. Also within this, you have flashbacks to an earlier time, also somewhere within there. So I guess you could use the hairpin shape to represent the bulk of the film, with the black and white, with the color, meeting in the last reel, the end of the film being sort of there.
Now, whilst it's not entirely identical, I'm sure you can see the similarities between this and Oppenheimer, particularly how it cuts back and forth between the two. The only difference, in my opinion, is that Oppenheimer cuts back and forth more because there's more plot going on. And secondly, rather than trying to tie everything together at the end of Act 3, everything ties together in Act 2 with the test detonation because already discussed, the whole film is built around that seminal moment. So for me, this is what makes Oppenheimer so damn genius. A combination of superb writing, direction, acting, and editing turned a story that could very well have become too boring for the average audience member into something truly spectacular to behold. But before I finish, though, I have a few more elements of this film that I'd like to praise. Firstly, the score, which is excellent. If you ever see the name Ludwig Göransson, chances are the score will be fantastic, and he delivers here as he always does, with the slowly building track of Can You Hear the Music, brilliantly conveying not only the escalation of Oppenheimer's ideas, but also the development of the bomb, and the escalation of its aftermath. There's a reason why this film ends with this track, because it epitomizes everything that this movie was about: escalation. Second, the performances across the board were spectacular. I've already touched on Cillian Murphy, so other special mentions go to Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Jason Clarke, and Jack Quaid, who, despite his small role, has one of the most powerful moments in the film: the handshake following the dropping of the bombs on Japan. And of course, we have to mention Robert Downey Jr. himself. I may adore his Iron Man, but in my humble opinion, this is the best I've ever seen him acting wise, and he was truly deserving of that Oscar, and I'm glad that he got it. Finally, Nolan's continued use of as much practical effects as possible continues to be deeply appreciated. Interestingly, much of this movie was shot in the very places the real Oppenheimer once stood, including Oppenheimer's real house in Los Alamos and the King's College, Cambridge. In a world of CGI green screen big budget movies, the real feels ever more special and authentic. Oppenheimer is a true blockbuster, and even though it lacks many of the regular conventions of the modern blockbuster, through its combination of exceptional talent in every element of this film's making, Nolan and team managed to craft something that was truly special. So that was my take on Oppenheimer. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, please like and subscribe.